Coming up on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, Edgar and I will get you all of your latest news and information from the state capitol and from CDE with updated information on the rules for employee vaccinate or test. Plus, we're talking Title IX with our friends over at F3 Law, what you need to know as you head into the new academic year.
The ACSA Legislative Lunch Break starts now.
It's a couple of minutes after 1 o'clock. We welcome you on a Wednesday to the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. I'm Naj Alikan, ACSA Senior Director of Marketing and Communications. You just saw momentarily right there, and there he is back. Edgar Zazwata, ACSA Executive Director. I knew at some point I was going to make that mistake. Edgar, broadcasting today.
Hey, I'm still getting accustomed to it too. So no worries.
Exactly. Edgar today broadcasting from the state of Arizona. Edgar, you want to give us an update on why you're in Arizona today?
Yeah, it's the new gig. Given the new title, it's definitely had me on the road, and I know sometimes that may cause us some issues here on Legislative Lunch Break because we're trying to make it work. So today I'm broadcasting from my hotel room in Sedona, Arizona. Beautiful place. I think everybody knows for the red cliffs and the beautiful hiking and whatnot. But I'm actually here. I wish I was here for pleasure. I'm trying to enjoy the scenery, but here for the Association of State Executives. It's an affiliate of AASA, the American Association of School Superintendents, and national organization. So I get to interface with a number of almost 40 of my counterparts from around the country, other executive directors from state associations representing administrators. So it's a nice opportunity for me to get in the mix. Causes some challenges. I'm trying to do this from my phone. I know the minutes before a legislative lunch break is probably our most stressful part of the day, trying to get Wi-Fi and whatnot connected. But it looks like we're making it work for now. We'll see. If I need you solo, Naj, you've been there before.
We will make sure that the metal hanger is right next to you in the event that you need to hold it to keep this signal going. I want to say hello to Gail Olson, Lester Powell, Donna Campbell, our good friend Deanna with us today here on the lunch break. Amy Wynn Hernandez from Central School District. So good to have you guys. Okay, let's bring this update in because I do know that we want to make sure we pass this information along to you. And Edgar just gave me a quick update on the updated rules for employee vaccine or test. Edgar, what is the latest from the governor's office?
Well, first, let me set some context. I think this is probably I've lost track. Maybe it was in March, April. We told our viewers and told them that, hey, the governor's office tells us that there's going to be an update in weeks, right? That there will be an update of some kind in weeks. Well, today's what, Naj? July 19th?
19th, so something like that.
Yeah, well, so much that weeks turned into months, and we didn't really get an official update. But in communications with the governor's office, they basically told me this, and and don't shoot the messenger, and we're relaying some news. But at this time, they do not have plans to modify the vaccinate or test requirement for employees. I will be the first to acknowledge that is somewhat different than what we were anticipating. I think I went out on a limb and said a number of times that I thought they were going to change that. That was in discussions. I think they acknowledged that those were in discussions. As of this week, they've told us that right now there is no plans to change it. I don't have the why there. We could presume, why some things may have changed. We're unfortunately in the midst of yet another surge.
Yeah.
So I think they've acknowledged some of the concerns we heard from the field, not to say things aren't going to change down the line, but right now, what the answer that we got, from the governor's office is that no plans to change the requirement for the time being.
Yeah, I'm glad that you brought that up about a surge, because that brings me to my next story, and this one from San Diego Unified School District, that as of Monday, students in the district required to wear masks. District officials announced in May that if we had some high-level COVID infection rates, that the masks would be back in the county. We do know that many of the year-round schools are now up and running for the new academic year. So students back in masks over there. Edgar, I just want to get your feedback on this because, San Diego Unified, I believe, the second largest school district in the state. Wondering if you think that other districts are going to have to make this kind of a choice as we move through to the beginning of the school year.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. And actually, we've been asked this question from some of the policymakers too, asking, hey, what are you hearing in the field? Are a lot of districts going to move back to masking requirement? And Naj, you and I know best, it's hard to make generalizations. We have 1,000 districts in the state, very different dynamics, could be different health situation, could be a different political situation. The bottom line is that, some of the noteworthy, San Diego Unified, like you said, second biggest in the state, has made that pronouncement. I know Sac City, my kids go there at the end of the school year because rates hiked to past a threshold they had established. They went to mask for the last couple weeks of school. I presume that if those thresholds still hold, that you may see something in some of those districts. LA County has been making some news, and I don't know if this became official or not, but I know that they were talking about some requirements in terms of if they met thresholds. So I think we have a dynamic. It's going to be twofold. I think we get this question from our members, at least now. And look, just the last update I gave a prediction, ended up being wrong. So I could be wrong again. Part of it comes with the territory. Right now, in conversations that we've had, I don't see the state going back to a full-on mask mandate from the state. Mm-hmm. I think to your question, I think the most probable piece is that you are going to have some communities, based on local decision making, because their leadership decided, or because they've set some thresholds, that they're going to just decide to either recommend it or make it mandatory. And then you have probably the third bucket in counties that have been a little bit more aggressive. There's scenarios where the county may now, the state may not say you have to wear masks, but the county may go there. So here, when we thought we were done fighting about masks, we've been down this road before. Yeah. We're starting the school year. I think it's a very fluid situation. The one piece is right now at the state level, don't expect much, at least now.
Yeah, I gotcha. Hey, I want to throw this story past you because you are meeting with some of the school executives from around the country, which is why you're in Arizona. And this leads us into our discussion about Title IX. A judge has temporarily stopped the U.S. Department of Education from enforcing the Title IX guidance, the new guidance that protects transgender students from discrimination. I'm reading this. This is a story from Politico. The federal judge in Tennessee sided with 20 Republican attorneys general who filed a lawsuit claiming that the guidance conflicts with state and local laws that restrict transgender students from using bathrooms, participating on athletic teams, or engaging in other activities that match their gender identity. Edgar, I have to assume that there are a number of federal issues that like-minded executive directors, association leaders in education are talking about. This one, obviously prominent because of the discussion we're going to have. It's hard to tell what the motivation is sometimes for some of these elements, some of these stories. But I wonder if you could just maybe give some feedback on what you're hearing related to this.
Well, if I had one takeaway here from my couple of days of meeting with some of my colleagues from around the country, something I already presumed, but now it's been made crystal clear. All places are not like California, like that around the country, there is a number of unique issues. Something that we've talked about on the show is in many parts of the country, some of the cultural issues are playing out in schools. Some of the things about access to bathrooms, LGBTQ issues. And I think this is what we're seeing here with some of these Title IX issues. I think part of the story is that, there's a judge really siding with a number of conservative leaders who had taken issue with some of these issues around access to bathrooms. So it's a legal one, which we're going to get into. It's also a political one, depending on what part of the state you're in, depending on what some of the local politics are, unfortunately. And we'll talk about this more as we get into November. I think we're going to hear more about these issues as you get closer to the election season. As we've been kind of forecasting, some of these bigger cultural issues that relate to schools are going to be at the forefront of trying to get folks to the ballot. So unfortunately, it's a very diverse and interesting landscape. I think for us, this is why we kind of settled on this topic, is trying to think about it. How does this apply to California? What are the things that our folks have to be on the lookout for?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go ahead and start talking about that. Jackie Litra is from Fagen, Friedman, and Fulfrost, F3 Law, our good friends over there at F3 Law. I will, of course, ask her the most important question about working over at F3 Law at the very end. I have not told her what that question is going to be. Jackie, so great to have you with us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. For our audience, can you summarize the changes to Title IX and how they impact California public school districts? What is it exactly that our members need to know?
So the most important thing that everybody needs to know right away is that they're just proposed. And for right now, we are still following the existing regulations. So we are still following those same procedures. So that's the most important thing everybody needs to know. There is nothing that needs to change right now. These are just proposed. But I can talk about, just to summarize for you, what are the actual regulations, the new proposed regulations that cover a lot more. So they're going to be a lot broader with regard to all sex discrimination. So now the Title IX regulations and the procedure that they provide covers all sex discrimination, not just sexual harassment. So the current regulations just apply to sexual harassment as defined under those regulations. The new proposed regs are going to have a procedure that applies to all sex discrimination that's covered by Title IX. They're also going to have a much broader definition of what is considered sexual harassment, hostile environment. So they're going to include a lot more in that hostile environment definition than what's included under the existing regs. The most important thing that I think the people will be excited about is that the new procedure for investigating and making decisions with regard to these is going to be a lot more simplified. And so it's going to be a lot easier for everyone to comply and address it quickly.
Jackie, thank you for coming on board, and you and your team are always great when we're needing some expert and legal advice here to the field. So thank you as always. Kind of on the same vein of what you were talking about, over the last number of years, I know you in your firm supporting your clients, our members around the state. Maybe give us a flavor for what were the types of issues that have been arising in terms of folks needing help, clarification. Where have been the challenges, and what is your opinion, given that there's new rules coming in, how will that kind of impact some of the issues that you've been hearing about?
So the implementation of the existing regulations has been extremely difficult for districts across the country. The procedures require an extensive amount of time. I estimate that on average, each process from complaint to written determination takes about 120 days on average. It's a very long process. A lot of times kids are on emergency removals for a long period of time before they even get a decision. There's a lot of upheaval and impact. The new proposed regulations are going to allow schools to get things done a lot quicker. They're also going to require a lot less personnel because under the current regulations, we have to have at least, 4 separate individuals that are part of that process. Under the new proposed regulations, we can go back to a single investigator decision maker model. So we don't have to have one person do the investigation and a separate person make the decision. So we'll be able to consolidate that process, simplify that process. Also, a lot of the written documentation back and forth that makes the current process very adversarial is going to go away. So we think it's going to be a process that'll be a lot more comfortable for our students, for our employees, and for school administrators that are doing the process. So it's going to get better. It's just going to be a little bit.
Hey, Jackie, I'm going to ask you a follow-up. Naj, if you don't mind, I'm going to ask a quick follow-up, because one thing I realized, and this is our fault for not thinking, and we fall into the trap sometimes of just throwing around the lingo and whatnot. And then some folks have commented on this. They come on the show, hey, we appreciate that you guys are trying to make sense of some of these things that, yeah, maybe we should know, but we don't know. So maybe actually let's take a step back. This probably should have been my first question, but it wasn't. Is when you have new school administrators or a new school leader, and we start throwing around these legal terms, Title IX, from your perspective, without obviously going into all the ins and outs of the law, I mean, just from a big picture standpoint, what are the things that folks, leaders need to know about this, even before we're talking about some of the changes?
So on the student side, I would say one of the things that is the biggest that they need to know, but often don't, especially like at the site level, is that when this happens, when there is an on-campus sexual assault reported, that needs to go through Title IX. When there is touching of private body parts, that needs to go through Title IX. A lot of sites are used to getting reports, investigating, making a decision, that day or the next day. And doing that would violate Title IX. So that is one of the things that is really important that they need to know, recognize when they need to reach out to their Title IX coordinators to make sure they're following the right process.
I want to remind you folks, if you have a question for Jackie, go ahead and put that into our comments and chat section. We'll go ahead and make sure we get any questions for Jackie before the end of the show. Jackie, did I hear you say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, there is so much more to the new proposed regs, but I didn't want to drag us down into like summarizing every single aspect of the 700 pages of rulemaking.
I think that our viewers thank you for not diving into the 700 pages. Let me just ask you, because we referred to this story at the very top of our show about that federal judge in Tennessee issuing a temporary injunction. What does that mean here in California? I know you talked about these are proposed changes, but what does this mean here in California? Do they kind of have to kick the can down the road here in California public school districts?
No. So the order, it has to do it. First, it only applies to the states that were plaintiffs in that matter. So it doesn't apply to California at all. It's only applying to the plaintiffs, which is 20, Republican attorneys general who filed on behalf of their states. It only applies there, and it is just simply enjoining the implementation of this guidance that was issued at the direction of the Biden executive order related to gender identity, discrimination, transgender status. So what they're saying is that they're enjoining the enforcement of that guidance. However, it in no way means that we would then would be required to discriminate against someone just because the order wasn't in place. And all of our California protections are still in place for those individuals. So all of the state law that we have, and we have an affirmative obligation under the California Ed Code to provide an environment for students that is free of discrimination on the basis of sex, race, and other protected characteristics. I mean, an affirmative obligation is a heavy obligation. It's not like the current regulations that is we have to just not be deliberately indifferent. In California, we're expected to we have an affirmative obligation to combat, and the definition of sex discrimination is going to include gender identity. That's been made very clear under California law. So it won't change anything that we're doing with regard to that right now. Also, this doesn't affect the proposed rulemaking. This has to do with the executive order. And so it really is essentially what the court said was that because they issued that executive order and then guidance documents from the EEOC and the Department of Education related to that executive order from the Biden administration, that was done without proposed rulemaking and public comment period. And so they violated the rules, and that's why it's not going to go into effect. But under the new proposed rulemaking, it expressly includes in sex discrimination, includes in the definition discrimination on the basis of transgender status, gender identity, etc. So all of that is going to be part of the new proposed rulemaking, and this decision isn't going to prohibit that. It's just limiting the executive order and the guidance that came out.
Jackie, thanks for that clarification. I mean, I know one of the things here at ACSA, and we put a huge emphasis on this in terms of districts really considering what their current practices are, thinking about putting rules and more in place that really are taking into account the diversity, inclusivity of our communities, right? So given the landscape that you talked about, for districts that are going through this work and thinking about their policies, thinking about different procedures, if they have to shift anything, what advice would you give them? I mean, like you said, some of these pieces are still in the rulemaking process. Should folks wait? Should we expect a lot of change, or can folks really just move forward with confidence that, especially if they're looking to update their policies and procedures?
So with regard to like gender identity issues or transgender, those, if your policies have been recently updated, they probably have that covered. They should hopefully have all that covered and should be continuing to do what we've been doing, which is to protect transgender students just as we would any other students. We treat them the same. We give them the same rights. You know, we respect their individuality. We don't discriminate on the basis of transgender or gender identity. That should still remain in place, and that's what we should continue to do. When it comes to the Title IX procedures, there we will need new procedures, and we'll have to have new procedures once the new rules come into effect. But for this upcoming school year, what everybody needs to do is make sure that they're familiar and implementing the existing regulations correctly, so that, you know, discipline and actions that they're taking are not going to be invalidated, and so that they're properly addressing any kind of sexual harassment that's going on their campuses as required by the law, whether that is falling under the California law bucket currently or under the federal law Title IX bucket. We just want to make sure that we're using the right procedure going forward and making sure everyone is trained who needs to be trained, because all of the districts need to have their Title IX coordinators trained on the existing regulations in order to be in compliance. And so that's really important, that everybody knows what they're doing going forward. As far as implementing policies, we should be making sure that we are implementing policies that are consistent with California law and do not discriminate on gender identity or transgender status.
Folks, want to let you know that Jackie is going to be hosting some Title IX webinars later this fall in collaboration with F3 and ACSA. So we're going to go ahead and put into the chat a link that gives you more information, and Jackie gets to host those webinars, and we'll look forward to that. All right, Jackie. So last question for you, and I ask every single member at F3 this exact same question, and Edgar and I have been keeping score on this. Of the three Fs there, Fagen, Friedman, and Fulfrost, which F is your favorite?
Ooh, that's a tough question. Howard Fulfrost is my favorite because I work with him the most frequently because we're both in the LA office. Gotcha.
All right, makes sense. That's the first vote, Edgar, that we have for Fulfrost of the F3s. Jackie Litra from F3 Law. Jackie, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Have a good one. Folks, we want to let you know that we will be launching a new mental health series coming up in August. This is something that our organization wants to take a lead role on, leading the discussion on mental health, not just for students, but for staff, for teachers, our school communities in general. And our executive producer, Michael Kelly, who will be hosting that video series, he joins us right now with a preview. Michael, good afternoon.
Naj, Edgar, good afternoon to the two of you. This is something, as you said, that we've been working on for the last couple of months now, and we recognize the importance of putting mental health at the forefront of these conversations. And so starting on August 2nd, we are going to do a live 5-week series for the entire month of August, every Tuesday at 1 o'clock. In the same way that you consume the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, you can consume our mental health series. We're really excited about the conversations that we're going to get to have over the next 5 episodes. And so certainly something that we're looking forward to. And boy, do we have just what a lineup we have of guests and panelists that will help us further this discussion. So something we're really looking forward to right now.
Yeah, Michael, you mentioned the guests. I don't want to put you completely on the spot for all of the guests that are
Sure.
going to be there. I mean, it is 5 weeks, so it can't just be you talking about it. Just give us some insight on some of the people who will be joining us for this.
Sure. So everything kicks off on August 2nd. And I think what we want to start with is just a conversation more than anything of what have the last couple of years been like for our leaders. What impact has it taken on you personally? What impact have you seen it take on fellow administrators, on teachers, on students? When we talk about mental health, we know that there are so many facets and so many layers of this. And so to start, we just want to have a discussion to say, hey, it's okay to not be okay, right? We hear that a lot, and it almost sounds cliche, but it's true that I think if we can really start to have conversations about mental health in a way of destigmatizing it, especially for educational leaders who are in these positions of power where they might feel like they can't have these discussions. And so that's the hope of the series. And then to your point, Naj, it's not just going to be me talking the whole time. On August 9th, we're really excited that the first partner of California, Jennifer Siebel-Newsom, will join us. That'll be a one-on-one conversation August 9th. Again, 1 o'clock, as every episode will be. Just the two of us talking about what the last couple of years have been like for her, the work that she's doing, the work that the state is doing, and also an opportunity for all of you to ask your questions of Jennifer Siebel-Newsom about how to best work with school districts, with students, with everybody to make sure that we're making mental health the primary focus.
The
Michael, I just have to. Oh, I'm
Go
sorry,
ahead,
Naj. I was just going to say, I mean, first, a big thank you to Michael and the rest of the team for just putting this together. I mean, this is in line with what we've been talking about. And, you know, and every time there's an incident or every time we see some of those headlines and the retention, I know one common theme in ACSA is that we want to be able to do more. We want to think about more. And this is not the panacea, right? What I would appreciate Michael saying is this is really about trying to start the conversation and if nothing else, getting us and our members comfortable about being vulnerable and talking about the issues that we know that are out there, especially for our members. It could be a really lonely job to be a site administrator, to be a district leader, regardless of where they're at in the spectrum. So this is obviously very important work, and I'm excited. Obviously, some big name guests, but also just our members just sharing and engaging in that dialogue, I think is really going to be fruitful.
And look, we're talking about the fact that 40% of the country was dealing with some form of anxiety or depression. And that doesn't even take into account the people who didn't realize that they were dealing with some form of anxiety or depression. And so when we say, look, this is the next pandemic, right? Is how do we find a way to make sure that mental health is at the forefront of every single conversation we have? Because that's the next step, right? And so when you look at the fact, and not to call out insurance providers, but when some hospitals and some insurance providers can't get therapy appointments for their patients for 3 or 4 months, clearly there is more that needs to be done. And we hope if nothing else, this will simply lead to more and more discussions about how to make mental health more of a priority.
Hey, Michael, look, you're on the live and interactive ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. You knew somebody was going to ask a question, so why not toss that to you? My apologies for mispronouncing this name. Noah Vayar Lee asked the question, will the mental health series include the state initiatives to include various staff, counselors, social workers, etc.? I'd like to see more intention placed on non-duplicating services. The way this is structured over these 5 episodes, Michael, it seems like you've got a number of touch points that you're going to be able to handle with all of these various discussions. I think it would seem that you're going to try and touch every piece of public education from the classroom up to district office and everywhere in between.
And then on top of that, providing resources, right? So one of the discussions, we're going to look at educator burnout in a really, really serious manner, because we've been talking about educator burnout for decades. But to look at the numbers over the last couple of years of people who are either retiring or leaving the workforce earlier than expected, leaving the profession earlier than expected, it's staggering. And so Elizabeth Steiner with the Rand Institute has done incredible work over the last 2 years. We'll be having a discussion with her on August 23rd, looking at the numbers, what she found, why people are leaving the profession, what they want to see done in school districts, in the classrooms to to help make mental health more of a priority. And so, yeah, we're going to look at this from a number of different angles. And again, providing resources is just yet another component.
Kicking off the series August 2nd, live and interactive, Your Mind First. Our executive producer, Michael Kelly, who will be hosting Your Mind First. Michael, so good to have you here on the show. Thanks so much.
Thank you all very much.
And folks, if you'd like what you have seen here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break, go ahead and subscribe or like us on social media. If you subscribe to us on YouTube, you will get information updates when we're about to come on live. You never know when we're going to come out live because there's news to report. Over on Facebook as well, go ahead and like us, be part of our family. And of course, if you have any interesting stories that are happening in your school district, go ahead and send those in, and you may be featured in EdCal. Our EdCal editor, Michelle Caro, go ahead and send information, photos, whatever's happening in your district to mcaro@ACSA.org. Edgar, a very informative show today. Want to let our viewers know we will not be on the air next week because Edgar and I are traveling together next week. So that's going to be interesting. I can guarantee the week after, Edgar, you and I will have at least one story to tell related to us having to travel together.
Let's hope. If I don't ignore you the whole time, Naj, I'm sure we'll have some.
All right. Thank you, folks, so much for joining us here on the ACSA Legislative Lunch Break. We are back live on Wednesdays, live and interactive, 1 p.m. Have a great rest of the day and rest of the week. We'll see you next time.